أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Introduction to Surah Al-Baqarah. As the opening surah sums up in 7 beautiful verses the essence of the Quran, so this surah sums up in 286 verses the whole teaching of the Quran. It is a closely reasoned argument. Summary. It begins verses 1 to verse 29 by classifying men into 3 broad categories, depending on how they receive Allah's message. This leads to the story of the creation of man, the high destiny intended for him, his fall, and the hope held out to him. Verses 30 to 39. Israel's story is then told according to their own records and traditions, what privileges they received and how they abused them, verses 40 to 86, thus illustrating again as by a parable the general story of man. In particular, reference is made to Moses and Jesus and their struggles with an unruly people, how the people of the book played false with their own lights and in their pride rejected Muhammad, who came in the true line of prophets, verses 87 to 121. They falsely laid claim to the virtues of Father Abraham. He was indeed a righteous Imam, but he was the progenitor of Ismail's line, Arabs, as well as the Israel's line, and he with Ismail built the Kaaba, the house of Allah in Mecca, and purified it, thus establishing a common religion, of which Islam is the universal exponent, verses 122 to 141. The Kaaba was now to be the center of universal worship and the symbol of Islamic unity, verses 142 to 167. The Islamic Ummat Brotherhood, having thus been established with its definite center and symbol, ordinances are laid down for the social life of the community, with the proviso, verse 177, that righteousness does not consist in formalities, but in faith, kindness, prayer, charity, probity, and patience under suffering. The ordinances relate to food and drink, bequests, fasts, jihad, wine and gambling, treatment of orphans and women, etc. Verses 168 to 242. Lest the subject of jihad should be misunderstood, it is taken up again in the story of Saul, Goliath, and David, in contrast to the story of Jesus, verses 243 to 253. And so the lesson is enforced that true virtue lies in practical deeds of manliness, kindness, and good faith, verses 254 to 283, and Allah's nature is called to mind in the sublime Ayat al-Kursi, the verse of the throne, verses 255. Verse 255. The surah ends with an exhortation to faith, obedience, a sense of personal responsibility, and prayer. Verses 284 to 286. This is the longest surah of the Quran, and in it occurs the longest verse, verse 282. The name of the surah is from the parable of the heifer, in verses 67 to 71, which illustrates the insufficiency of carping obedience. When faith is lost, people put off obedience with various excuses. Even when at last they obey in the letter, they fail in the spirit, which means that they get fossilized, and their self-sufficiency prevents them from seeing that spiritually they are not alive but dead. For life is movement, activity, striving, fighting against baser things, and this is the burden of the surah. This is in the main an early Medina surah.